Hi, and welcome to episode 94 of the Breaking Bio podcast. I'm Morgan Jackson, a PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada.
Hi, I'm Tom Housley. I'm a postdoc at the University of Exeter in Penryn.
And we're back to the normal world of things. Alt-October has come to a close. I hope you guys found it useful. Actually, we just put up a synopsis of Alt-October at breakingbio.com this afternoon, which has got all the advice that all of our guests gave. So if you're looking for a single place to go to, check it out at breakingbio.com. You can find it all in one place now. So back to the world of academia at large. And this week we're going to be talking to somebody who I think a lot of people online will have already known and is following along with her fieldwork for the last few months. And that is Auriel Fournier, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Arkansas. Welcome to Breaking Bio. Auriel, thank you very much for joining us.
I'm really happy to be here, Morgan.
Awesome. You may be the longest-term listener we've ever had actually show up on the show, so props for that.
Yay.
So do you want to tell everybody that's listening who doesn't follow you and your escapades on Twitter a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a fourth-year PhD student, and I just finished up my fourth field season trying to understand and kind of tease apart a lot of different things about fall migration for this really cool group of birds called rails. And if you don't know what rails are, that's okay. Most people don't. They're really secretive birds that live in wetlands. They kind of look like a shorebird, but they're not related to shorebirds. And they're very, very rarely seen. So they're actually one of the families of birds in North America that are the least studied, which is really something because most birds in North America are fairly well studied, at least to some extent. So my project is, first off, just doing a lot of natural history data collection, trying to figure out where they are and when they're there during migration and what kind of habitats they're using. And then we're also doing a big statewide experiment looking at different kinds of wetland management and how that management works for the rails and then also works for other groups of birds like ducks and geese, since these wetlands are, of course, not only used by rails. So that's the short version.
That's good. The tweet-sized version. That's the good version. So let's get in. We'll start off with some of your research, your core work, and what you're doing there. Particularly, I'm interested in the wetland management part because this is, a fairly hot topic in a lot of parts of the world as wetlands are being impacted by development and other human uses, and there's a lot of people who have interest in them, both from recreational purposes, whether they're spending time on the wetland doing, benign things like canoeing and fishing and stuff like that, or whether they're using these for perhaps hunting grounds and stuff. What's been a big challenge for you working with all these different groups, trying to figure out how your study species is fitting into this big, complicated picture?
Well, probably the first challenge is just convincing a lot of people that we really need to be thinking about species that aren't like traditional game species. So I work in Missouri, which is in the middle of the U.S. It's not on the coast, so most of the wetlands are restored wetlands. In some cases, they're still the natural wetland, but in most cases, they were fields at one point, and now they've been restored. So they require really intensive management, and they were restored for the purposes of having habitat for waterfowl. So a lot of it comes down to saying, hey, we have this habitat for waterfowl, but we also need to be managing for other species, which thankfully, the agencies I work with, Missouri Department of Conservation and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, are very multi-species oriented, and they're becoming more and more so with time. So that argument is becoming easier and easier to make, and we're very fortunate to have 13 different properties managed by 13 different people who are all willing to be part of my project, which has been quite an adventure. So that's the first hurdle, but there are many with my project. It's a lot of moving parts. So.
How much of the managing and getting back and forth and making sure everything's working out is your responsibility versus are you coming into a project that, this is a well-oiled machine that has been running for multiple years and you're helping take advantage, or not taking advantage of, but helping to come along and add an extra component?
So when I started, the project had already, at least the initial parts of the project had already been developed by my advisor, Dr. David Kremitz. And then also a PI with Missouri Department of Conservation, Doreen Mengel. So they had already contacted some of the land managers and kind of set up a baseline for me to work off of. And since then, it's largely been me. On occasion, my advisor or Doreen will also speak on behalf of the project. But for the most part, it's me sending out lots of emails and driving around Missouri talking to people and doing a lot of online presentations because I have sites all over the state, so it's hard to get everybody together. So I found we do a lot of like live meetings where I give PowerPoints online. Which seems to work pretty well, keeps everybody informed.
So I'm always interested in these kinds of setups. Do you just kind of like see what the management that these people are doing? Like, do they drive it, or is it you saying, I want you guys to try this thing, you guys to try that, and we'll see, like we'll look at what happens afterwards?
Yeah, so we started the project in fall of 2012, and for 2012 and 2013, we were just passively collecting data on the management that was taking place on the conservation areas and national wildlife refuges. And then based on that, we developed some hypotheses about how we thought the management was impacting the rails. And we went to the managers and we said, would you guys be willing to be part of this experiment? And what we observed was that in these wetlands, they get dried out a bit during the summer and then flooded up again in the fall. That drying period allows the plants to germinate. And the drying period was overlapping quite a bit with rail migration. So we were saying, would you be willing to flood some of your wetlands a little bit earlier so that there's water, which is something that rails need in their habitat? And then we can see if the rails do respond to that, which we thought that they would, and then also look at trade-offs for other species. So the first 2 years was just passive, but now we're actually working with the managers and actually assigning flooding treatments to different impoundments, starting in 2014 and going through 2016.
Cool. I also have a stupid question about rails.
There are no stupid questions about rails.
So, are there loads of different species of rails, or what's going on?
Well, it depends on how you define rails. So within North America, most people would say we have somewhere between like 5 to 10 species. It depends on how you split them out. Within Rallidae, the family, there's, again, it's hard to tell worldwide. There's somewhere between 100 and 300 species, but a lot of them have like only been documented one time and are probably extinct or maybe extinct. But I work on 4 species, and I work on 4 of the 5 that are migratory in North America. So there's the Sora, Virginia rail, yellow rail, king rail. Those are the ones that I work on, and there's also black rails, which I would work on if I could find them, but I haven't seen one yet. But we also have clapper rails in North America, and recently clapper rails were split, and we now have ridgeways rail out in the west. And then there's other species like coots that are also part of Rallidae, but are not traditionally considered rails just because behaviorally they're a little bit different. They're far too extroverted to really be a rail is what it comes to.
So how does that kind of diversity sort of impact what your management and your experimentation does?
Yeah, so about 97% of the birds that we see are soras. So most of what we're interested in is soras just because they're the bulk of the biomass of rails that's moving through these wetlands. We're also interested in how it's impacting the other rail species, especially yellow rails and king rails. King rails have been declining for several decades, and we're not really sure why. And yellow rails, we've never really had a good handle on how they're doing, and we think that they're fairly rare. So the experiment is also looking at them, but for them, we're really at the stage still where we just need good natural history information. We really don't know what kind of habitats they use, so we're just trying to get a good grasp on that. And we also caught yellow rails, Virginias, and Soras this fall to get feathers for stable isotope work to try and look at migratory connectivity. Because that's a big question as well. Like, Missouri is just stopover habitat for these birds. We don't know what part of the breeding ground they're coming from, and we don't actually know where they're going on the wintering grounds either. So we're trying to collect some initial data on that as well.
So that's a good starting point. So we talk about migration, and I'm sure most people are familiar with birds migrating. That's the thing that everybody knows about birds, the basics, I guess. So where you don't know exactly which breeding grounds or winter habitats they're going to, but where generally are they starting and ending over the course of the year?
So rails generally will breed kind of as far south as like Iowa, southern Wisconsin, kind of the upper part of the Midwest, and they breed up into Canada. On the East Coast, the breeding range goes down a little bit farther south. And then, kind of the central U.S., the Corn Belt area is largely stopover habitat, and then wintering habitat is usually like southern Arkansas, the northern part of Mississippi, farther south to the Gulf Coast. They likely go down into Mexico. There are records of them on oil platforms over the Gulf, all the different species. So some of them at least have at one point tried to cross the Gulf. We really don't know if that's a thing that they do all the time or if those instances were just crazy birds that tried to fly across the Gulf of Mexico. So for some birds like the black rail, there's still a lot of question marks. But for things like Sora, we've got a little bit better idea. So.
Sweet.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think, coming from an invertebrate side where we can defensively say we know nothing about anything. It's crazy to hear about birds, which are these big popular things that so many people pay big money to go out and look for, and we still don't know jack about them in some regards.
Yeah. I mean, they're really difficult to see. I mean, I only see them because I'm out in the wetland walking around, and I scare them up out of the wetland. They really. I mean, they can fly, and they can fly hundreds of miles in a night when they're migrating, but they do not fly unless they absolutely have to. And unless it's during the spring, they really don't vocalize regularly. So they're hard to see, and they're hard to study, which is why I get to be the lucky one that gets to do it now. So.
That's a pretty good segue. Walking. You said walking around marshes, looking for them and trying to get them to flush, but this fall I didn't see a whole lot of walking. I saw a whole lot of motorized vehicling
There's
through
not
marshes.
a lot of walking in my project. So we do ATV surveys. We found that it's really effective. We go out at night and we drive transects through the wetland, like back and forth in kind of like a snake shape, and flush the birds. Because during the fall they don't vocalize regularly, and unlike a lot of birds, like they don't respond to vocalization either. During the fall, that is. So we can't use like traditional like passive or active broadcast survey methods. So we just go out and we flush them. And it seems to work pretty well. We see somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 soras every fall. So we get a lot of observations. And we do it in a sampling framework that allows us to actually get abundance estimates, which is really cool too. But yeah, I spent a lot of time driving ATVs and then breaking them and then fixing them and then driving them. It's a vicious cycle.
Have you ever run over a rail?
Not that I'm aware of. I honestly don't think that we do. They are very, very good runners and swimmers, and they very actively flush out away ahead of us. I mean, we've put in thousands of hours at this point. Perhaps we have run one over, but I really think that it is a very rare occasion. So.
That's really
you can at least keep telling yourself that anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's good. So you brought up the mechanical difficulties of driving an ATV, where ATVs are probably not supposed to be driven on a regular basis. It looked like you guys had some pretty interesting experiences this fall as you were going into the wetlands. Look, and I'm just going to say it out loud. You guys are total badasses for spending the days, playing mechanic. And then spending your nights chasing rails through the wetlands. So what were some of the challenges you guys faced this year?
So a lot of it just has to do with, like you said, ATVs are not designed to be driven through water regularly, much less muddy water, especially in a low gear where the engine has to work really hard for hours and hours and hours. So a lot of the issues we face are just wear and tear because we're really hard on them. And then we also deal with the issue that these wetlands are not like flat. So you occasionally come to a deep spot and you get water in the engine, which luckily did not happen this year. But I mean, there's all different kinds of things that go wrong on them. The brakes will go out on occasion because water gets in or something gets pulled out. The vegetation likes to get around the drive shaft and the axles and make things get all funky. Or go in the air filter and get in the carburetor. That's another fun one. So, yeah, it's a lot of, I mean, I've learned so much in the past 4 years. I was very, very fortunate my first 2 years to have a technician who was really good mechanically and taught me a lot. And I've been using the internet to figure the rest of it out the past 2 years. But yeah, we've had just about everything go wrong at this point.
So did you have experience going in with mechanical tinkering or fixing ATVs or small other electronics, or is this something that one of those unknown skills that you've had hidden in your life your whole life?
I mean, my dad was an auto mechanic, so like I'm not unfamiliar, but I definitely didn't take advantage of his skill set and learned as much as I should have. But like, I mean, I knew how to change the oil in a car. Like I know like how to do basic maintenance, and I'm not afraid of wrenches and getting dirty. So I was well prepared at a very low level, but not actually ready for what was required.
Well, it seems like you've made the best of a new experience then.
Yeah, it's been fun.
That's good.
Frustrating at times, but fun.
You're doing better than me. I would still be neck deep in the marshland with a broken ATV, having no idea how to fix it. So you got many skills that I admire.
Well, it's a nice sort of a segue from our alt-October into regular business again, because we were talking about the sort of the weird skills that you get during your PhD that you wouldn't generally think that you would pick up.
Yeah, I definitely didn't think I'd basically be getting like a small engine repair certificate as part of my PhD.
Well, that'll go really well when you get to the interview stages and some people are looking at your CVs and can fix an ATV in less than 5 minutes flat in the dark, in the neck deep in water. That's going to go over pretty well with a lot of field biology departments, I'm sure.
Indeed.
Very coveted skill. And so we brought it up a couple of times how we know about these stories and know, we have a preceded idea of what we're going to be talking about on this podcast because you've been sharing the entire adventure really well on Twitter and tweeting from the back of your ATV and with Soras in hand and all sorts of cool stuff, taking your followers along and into the wetland with you. What was your impetus for getting onto Twitter and then also taking advantage of it to the degree that you have?
So it was a little over 2 years ago. Is it 3 years ago at this point? I think now. It was in 2013, 2 years ago. The Ecological Society of America meeting. I saw on Facebook that one of my friends was posting tweets from the meeting, and I had wanted to go to the meeting, and I didn't get to for various reasons. And so I didn't actually sign on to Twitter, but I was like looking at it and saw that like people who weren't just talking about lolcats were on Twitter, and I was like, that's kind of interesting. And I had also kind of hit a point in my degree where I was feeling kind of like scientifically lonely just because our lab is, our department is not a field biology department. So sometimes it can be a little like, there's nobody here who understands what's going on. Like, most of my friends don't fix ATVs as part of their research. So I guess I saw Twitter as a way to get to connect with people who would have kind of a common experience. And that's definitely what I've continued to get out of Twitter, is some really great kind of community and also mentoring, which I didn't expect at the time. But yeah, and then seeing different folks, I don't know who it was who originally told me that I should start a hashtag for my project, but I started in 2014 really tweeting about it a lot, and probably took it up another notch this fall. So it's been fun.
I think it's a good idea having, a project-specific hashtag, especially when you've got a lot of field work and are sharing a lot of stories as they happen. Have you brought that back into the lab at all, or brought that to your advisors or into your thesis development project and thought about including this outreach component in amongst your hard traditional scientific data?
So my advisor is aware that I'm on Twitter, and I've kind of tried to explain it to him, and he doesn't mind that I do it, but I don't think he really cares one way or the other. And I've kind of talked with my lab mates about it, and they're aware that I do it as well, but they don't see the utility, which I think is unfortunate. I have not really looked at trying to incorporate it as part of my dissertation, more than I just see it as a way to do outreach, basically. Like I'm working on a grant right now, and I'm trying to incorporate a lot of different things about how I use Twitter and how I would plan to use Twitter as part of that project if it got funded. Some different ideas that I have about how we could use it. So I guess more in the future is how I see Twitter becoming actually part of more like my research. Right now it's more of just a place I go for community and to share pictures of rails with people that seem to like it. So.
Oh, that's great. And I guess there are a lot of corollaries between, your fun outreach on Twitter and the stuff that you have to do with your land managers and as you said earlier, the presentations and the reaching out to the people who own and manage and give you a place to do your research as well. So I'm sure that there is a lot being learned and cross-pollinating those two things and helping you do what you need to do.
Definitely, definitely. I really like trying to help people understand like the value of these state and federally managed properties and why they're so important. A lot of folks just see them from like a hunting angle, and if they're not hunters, they don't see it as being accessible. And a lot of people don't understand the amount of work that goes into managing a wetland that's completely cut off from its natural hydrology. So, I mean, the amazing men and women that manage these properties are really, really cool, and I have huge respect for them because they have really hard jobs fighting the weather and budgets and everything else. So, yeah, I really like trying to share that with the public, and then, I don't know, hopefully also making their jobs a little easier, maybe inspiring somebody to appreciate them a little bit.
I'm sure they're thankful for such efforts. Okay, so speaking of being thankful, there's one last thing I think we should really touch on here, and that is the role of internships, particularly in field biology. You and another former guest of the podcast, Alex Bond, we'll link to his episodes in the show notes at Breaking Bio, of course. You guys have been really outspoken lately about the role of unpaid internships in field biology. Can you tell us all a little bit about what it is you guys don't like about unpaid internships, even as obvious as that sentence should be?
Okay, so this is something that Alex and I have been talking about for over a year now on Twitter. And when we're talking about unpaid internships or technician positions or seasonal jobs, however you want to title them, I'm just going to start off saying we're talking about full-time unpaid work. We're not talking about like going and helping the Audubon Society like every once in a while. We're talking about like telling somebody, come work for me for free for 6 months. Like those are the kind of positions we're talking about. So the reason we don't like them is because they're not accessible to everybody. They make financial ability a prerequisite for the position. And financial ability has nothing to do with one's ability to actually complete the job or to be a good scientist, and it's limiting the diversity of applicants. And since, especially in field biology, if you don't have fieldwork experience, you then can't get into graduate school or get a full-time technician position. It works its way up the ladder. So, I mean, that's kind of the long and short of it. We think that it's really harming diversity, and that it's not professional to expect somebody to come and work for you and not pay them. Yeah, that's the short version.
So the thing that I always see on Twitter whenever this is brought up from people who are advertising these positions is that conservation biology doesn't have enough money and there's not enough funding there to pay people to come and do this. So what would your response be to that?
Well, I think that's a very poor excuse for bad behavior, basically. If you don't have money to put gas in the truck doesn't get gas. If you don't have money to pay for your stable isotope samples to get run, they don't get run. If you don't have money to pay for technicians, you don't get technicians. I realize the budgets are tight. That's a reality. Part of what Alex and I have talked about is the fact that some funding agencies won't allow their money to be used to pay for technicians. And I think that is total BS. I think that those funding agencies really need to think about why they have those restrictions, especially when these are large pots of money that can't be used to pay for techs, because that's just ridiculous. And I think the second part of it is it's just a change of mindset. People need to be putting those line items into their budgets, even if it means that you can do a little bit less, or you need to rethink the way that you set up your project. Maybe instead of having a technician for 4 months unpaid, you have somebody come in and work for just 4 weeks and you're able to pay them. And you just work really hard for those 4 weeks and redesign things a different way. It's not a simple problem. Neither Alex or I thinks it's a simple problem. A lot of folks seem to think that we're like, oh, their money will magically rain from the sky. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but we're really hurting science by not making these positions accessible to people. And I don't know what the answer is, but it's something we need to be talking about, and it's something we need to be considering, especially a lot of the organizations and societies that are spending a lot of time talking about diversity. I think this is one of the issues that they should be addressing.
Yeah, for the record, I agree 100% on that. But I'm also wondering about, you talked about how it's limiting diversity through, people with financial ability coming over from, Europe or the States. But I also just wonder, that a lot of fieldwork takes place in, in Africa and the Far East, well, in Asia, and just whether, getting local people to work as technicians or research assistants on these things would be a good idea, whether that comes up in your piece as well.
That is not something that Alex and I really addressed in our editorial. It's definitely something that I think could be part of the conversation. I've never done international fieldwork, so I don't know how much I can actually comment on the feasibility of that. I know I have friends who have very strong opinions on one side or the other about hiring people in country, but that could definitely be one way of getting around some of the expenses. Because if you can find somebody who's already there, you don't have to fly them over, and plane tickets are not cheap. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it just requires a really I don't know, a conscious effort to try and find a way around it. It's not an easy thing to talk about, and I mean, some people have taken great offense at Alex and I talking about this issue. They feel that we've been trying to point out certain individuals, and this is definitely not meant to be a personal attack. It's an issue that science and in reality a lot of society has, and I think it's something that we need to be talking about and we need to be discussing. But obviously, it's not just going to solve itself.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I give you guys major props for taking somewhat of a fairly big risk in some circles to call out this unacceptable behavior and decisions and deal with the feedback. And you guys have started a Tumblr, which has kind of been accumulating some of these things and have really brought the discussion to home to make people conscious of this effort and why it's actually a problem. What's some of the feedback, positive or negative, that you guys have received so far from the ecological community?
So we've received quite a bit of positive feedback, largely from students, either students who are still doing seasonal positions or students who have in the past, saying like, yes, this is how I felt for a really long time, and just kind of general thank you for talking about this. We've also received some negative feedback from students who are the ones who are attempting to hire someone without paying them, saying like this is unfair, or we've had students that are from underrepresented minorities who are saying, well, I made it this far in science, and and I took unpaid positions, so your argument is invalid, which isn't actually how that works. So it's been a little frustrating. It's really frustrating to get the feedback from the students and to hear them trying to argue against us, because I feel like they're arguing against themselves and against the future of science, which I find very frustrating. We've also gotten some negative feedback from folks who are higher up the job food chain, saying like, you guys are naive, you guys don't understand the funding realities or XYZ issues. That's kind of the negative feedback that we both expected. I mean, those are the people that I've been talking to for years about these issues, who have been telling me like, well, I volunteered for 2 years and here I am, and I'm like, well, yeah, but what about all the people that were standing beside you at that point that aren't here now because they couldn't afford to do that? So I think it's the negative feedback from folks who are trying to make the argument that, I represent, insert this minority, I represent a racial minority, or I represent, a sexual orientation minority, or I represent, a financial minority, and I made it, so everybody else can too. And it's like, well, I'm really glad that you did. I'm genuinely glad that you made it, but that doesn't mean that the path is equal for everybody else.
Yeah. Really good points. So you guys have got, I think you mentioned it briefly, you guys have got an op-ed or an editorial coming out soon on this issue that people can read if they're interested?
Yeah, it's going to be coming out in the Wildlife Society Bulletin. I just sent the proofs back in last night. It should be available online here in the next couple of weeks. They haven't actually told me yet what issue it'll be coming out in. I suspect it'll either be the December or the March issue. But I'm sure Alex and I will be plastering it all over Twitter when it's available. So look for that.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to share it as well, because I think it's definitely an issue that more people should be at least aware of and be forced to clarify their positions on one way or another. Awesome. So I guess we're pretty much out of time. These things happen so fast. Where can people follow along with everything that you're working on, both related to your PhD, fieldwork, and these other issues that you obviously care very deeply about?
So on Twitter, I'm at RalladayRule, and then my website is aurielfournier.io. Oh gosh. I'll figure this out. Give me a second. It's been a long day. aurielfournier.github.io. I swear I should know that. So that's my personal website. I have kind of a blog there. You can read my original really, really ranty post about unpaid internships that has been much more thoroughly researched and refined to become the editorial. The two look very little like each other anymore. But yeah, that's where you can get at me.
Cool. And we'll make sure that everybody at home, those links are at breakingbio.com, and so you can find them and all this other stuff, including a link directly to Auriel's and as well as Alex's rants on unpaid internships and the Tumblr, so you can go there and see how not to post looking for an intern. That's the thing you don't want to do. So that's great. So all that stuff, like I said, is going to be on breakingbio.com. Of course, we'll be tweeting everything out as well through our Twitter account from Breaking Bio, which is @BreakingBio. And you can find us on Facebook, iTunes, and Stitcher by searching for the Breaking Bio podcast, which I hope you'll do. And join the conversation and take us along with you wherever you're perhaps doing field work on an ATV in the middle of the night. If Auriel can do it, so can you. So that's the justification. We need to thank the European Society for Evolutionary Biology, of course, for making sure the internet feeds keep running and we can deliver all these cool interviews and such to you. And I hope everybody will join us next week when we go back into the academic files and see who else we can bring out.